and the rolling limestone hills of central Texas, where the live oaks twist like old bones and the rivers run low in summer, there's a little place called Hollow Pine. It's the kind of town you blink and miss. Population 412 on a good day. White clapboard churches, a single feed store, and fields of hay and cattle that stretch out until they meet the cedar breaks. Folks there still wave at every passing truck, or at least they used to. But 3 years ago, the sky turned its back on Hollow Pine. Month after month, no rain. The Blanco River shrank to a muddy trickle. Cracks split the red dirt wide enough to swallow a boot. Cattle dropped dead in the pastures. Gardens turned to dust. People started saying the land itself was cursed. And like always, when good Christian folk get scared, they start looking for someone to blame. Her name was Mama Ruth, or as most folks called her behind her back, the healer of Hollow Pine. She lived alone in a weathered cedar shack at the very edge of town, where the dirt road turned to gravel and then disappeared into the pine thicket. She was old, nobody knew exactly how old, with silver hair braided down her back and hands stained dark from years of crushing herbs and roots. People came to her when the doctors in Kerrville couldn't help. A fever that wouldn't break? Mama Ruth had a tea for that. A woman in hard labor? She'd sit through the night, whispering prayers and rubbing the belly with comfrey and black cohosh. She never asked for money, just a jar of honey or a loaf of bread if you could spare it. Most folks respected her, some even loved her. Until the night, everything changed. It was the middle of July. The air was so thick and hot it felt like breathing through wet wool. The biggest rancher in Hollow Pine, Harlan Whitaker, sent for Mama Ruth at 2 a.m. His daughter-in-law, pretty young Becky Whitaker, was in labor with their first grandchild. The baby was turned wrong. The bleeding wouldn't stop. Mama Ruth went 2 miles in the dark with nothing but a kerosene lantern in her old leather satchel. She stayed for 14 straight hours. At first, the women inside the big white farmhouse said you could hear Mama Ruth singing low and steady, old hymns mixed with something older, something that sounded half prayer, half spell. Then came the scream. Becky Whitaker died just after dawn, the baby stillborn in her arms. The sheets were soaked crimson. The men gathered on the porch, faces red from heat and grief and something uglier. Someone whispered at first, "She killed her. That old witch finally showed her true colors." By sundown, the rumor had become gospel. They said Mama Ruth had cursed the land for years, and now she'd taken her payment in blood. The drought, her doing. The dying cattle, her hex. And poor Becky was just the latest sacrifice. That same night, 30 men and a few women marched up the gravel road carrying torches and shotguns. They dragged Mama Ruth out of her shack in her nightgown. She didn't fight. She just looked at them with those calm gray eyes and said one thing: "I only ever brought life into this world. Y'all are the ones bringing death tonight." They tied her to the old hanging oak at the center of town, the same tree where they used to string up horse thieves back in the 1800s. The flames went up fast. The dry cedar shingles of her shack caught like paper. Her herbs and roots filled the night air with a sweet, choking smoke that smelled like lavender and graveyard dirt. As the fire roared, Mama Ruth lifted her head one last time and spoke words no one would ever forget. "You burned the wrong woman. My hands brought babies crying into this world, but now they'll bring something else. What you took from me, I'll take threefold from you." Then she smiled, and the fire swallowed her. The very next morning, the air over Hollow Pine felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like something invisible was pressing down on every roof. It started at the Whitaker Ranch. First came the smell, rotting meat. Though no animal had died, it seeped from the walls of the big house and clung to clothes no matter how many times they were washed. Then the crops in Harlan's fields began to blacken overnight. Stalks that had somehow survived the drought now dripped a thick black sap that smelled like spoiled blood. Harlan's wife Loretta woke up screaming 3 nights later. Her hair was falling out in clumps on the pillow. When she looked in the mirror, she saw dark purple bruises blooming across her throat and chest, shaped exactly like small handprints. The bruises were cold to the touch. By the end of the week, the entire Whitaker family was rotting from the inside. Cattle were found dead in the pasture with their eyes wide open and tongues black. Flies covered them in thick, buzzing carpets, even though the bodies were still warm. At night, the family swore they could hear a baby crying in the empty nursery, except when they opened the door, the crib was rocking by itself. Word spread fast. People started avoiding the Whitaker place, but it wasn't just them anymore. The curse was spreading. Old Mr. Jenkins, who had carried the first torch that night, found his well water turned thick and red. When he tried to draw a bucket, something moved under the surface, something with long silver hair. The preacher who had prayed while Mama Ruth burned started coughing up dry herbs and roots every morning. And every night, no matter how still the air was, the hanging oak in the town square creaked and swayed, as if an invisible body still hung there. Desperately, Harlan Whitaker did what any proud Texan man would do. He called in the experts. First, a pastor from San Antonio who specialized in spiritual warfare. He lasted 2 nights before he packed his Bible and fled, muttering that something older than Christianity had been awakened. Then a curandero from
skin and refused to even step inside the house. Finally, Harlan himself took a shovel and a bottle of whiskey and drove out to the burned ruins of Mama Ruth's shack at midnight. He started digging where her root cellar used to be. 3 feet down, his shovel hit something soft. It was a small cornhusk doll, no bigger than a newborn baby. The doll was wrapped in a scrap of Becky Whitaker's blood-stained nightgown. Strands of silver hair, Mama Ruth's hair, were braided into its tiny head, and across its chest, scratched deep with a burn stick, were the words, "What you took from me, I take from you." Harlan tried to burn it right there. The moment the flame touched the doll, every light in Hollow Pine went out at once, and from the darkness came a voice, calm, old, and smiling. "You should have let me finish the birth, Harlan. They say that if you drive through Hollow Pine after dark now, you'll see the Whitaker house still standing, but no lights ever burn inside. Sometimes on the hottest summer nights when the drought returns, people swear they see an old woman with silver braids walking the dirt roads, carrying a lantern and another satchel. She stops at houses where a woman is in labor. Most folks lock the doors and pray, but a few still open the door, because in Hollow Pine they finally learn the truth the hard way. Some healers never really die. They just wait for the next baby to be born, so they can decide whether it gets to